With the help of some brothers and sisters, this podcast was created to discuss some spiritual topics that you may have questions about. The goal is that you gain a better understanding on the topic, but more importantly, that you grow closer to the Lord. With the help of my little buddy, kick us off.
Stop being pew potato. That's Josh Hudson.
Welcome to Stop Being a Pew Potato. I'm Josh Hudson, and with me for the second time, my wife, Haley. Thanks for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for letting me back into your studio.
What I'd like to do today, to start off the episode, is to kind of show a little bit about our personalities. So this episode is entitled, Be Careful Little Mouth What You Say. And we both got a quote. And it's funny because I think both quotes are really good, by the way.
Yeah.
But both quotes say a little bit about us. So my quote comes from, well, it's a nursery rhyme. What's your quote?
Yeah, that says a lot about you.
Yeah. But what's your quote?
My quote is from Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, so yours is presidential.
Well,
And
yeah.
mine's from a nursery rhyme. Well, you go first.
Okay. Hold on, let me unlock my... Actually, in high school, I had a teacher that said this to us, and it just really kind of stuck with me throughout my life. It doesn't mean I've always applied it, but I do think about it every now and then. And it is, it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak out and remove all doubt.
That's pretty deep.
It is deep.
Mine is entitled, A Wise Old Owl. A wise old owl sat in an oak. The more he heard, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he heard. Why aren't we all like this wise old bird? The reason that we would like to talk about controlling the tongue today is because we have a 3-year-old
Yeah.
who often doesn't control his tongue.
He does not control his tongue. We have an example tonight.
Yeah, that's actually where I was going to go. Do you want to take this or do you?
Well, usually you're the better storyteller.
Okay, well, we were eating, and it was just the four of us. Everybody was having a good time. Everybody was being nice.
Which is rare when
yeah,
we're out
like
to
we're normally
eat.
the family that everybody's like, oh my goodness, I feel sorry for them.
Or get out.
Yeah, everybody leave. Well, so first of all, there's this elderly lady, and she's with her daughter, and they're together. And we saw them as we were coming in. We said hello, and Wyatt smiled, and they talked for a minute. And then we went and we ate.
Yeah.
And then after the meal, both of them came to our table.
Started a conversation
Started a
again.
conversation.
Mainly just to get Wyatt
Yeah,
going.
and Wyatt says at first he just got a haircut.
Yeah.
And so he had said something about his
He's
haircut.
very proud of his haircut.
And then the elderly lady said something to him, and he says to her, your hair is crazy. And I could have crawled underneath the table, and she said, I'm sorry, what? And he said, your hair is crazy. He said it 2 times. But fortunately, she didn't hear
Thank goodness.
him. So it was really embarrassing. But this is just another example of controlling your tongue.
Yeah.
Or as we have entitled this episode, Be Careful Little Mouth What You Say, Wyatt. When I was younger, I thought about James 3 a little bit differently because of where I was at in life.
Yeah.
And then when we were married, we probably thought about it a little bit different.
Yeah.
We probably still should think about controlling our tongues a little bit in our marriage.
Yeah. We'll go there in a minute.
Carefully, we will.
Very carefully.
But now we think about James 3 in the eyes of a parent. And so today, what we'd like to do is read James 3. We're going to start in verse 3 and go to 12. Then transition into talking about it in a marriage relationship, talking about controlling your tongue, things that can occur, good or bad. We're going to talk about this in the eyes of being a parent, and we're also going to look at this as brothers and sisters. So James 3, and like I said, starting in verse 3, this is the Holman Christian Standard Bible version. Now when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we also guide the whole animal. And consider ships. Though very large and driven by fierce winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things. Consider how large a forest a small fire ignites. And the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among the parts of our bodies. It pollutes the whole body, sets the course of life on fire, and is set on fire by hell. Every sea creature, reptile, bird, or animal is tamed and has been tamed by man, but no man can tame the tongue. It is restless evil, full of deadly poison. We praise our Lord and Father with it, and we curse men who are made in God's likeness with it. Praising and cursings come out of the same mouth. My brothers, these things should not be this way. Does a spring pour out sweet and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree produce olives, my brothers, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a saltwater spring yield fresh water. So there's a lot of things crammed in these verses that we just read. Specifically, in the very beginning, we see the comparisons of how powerful the tongue can be. It mentions a bit in the horse's mouth. It mentions a rudder of a ship and how small that is and how that can direct the way it should go. And it mentions a small fire and what damage that small fire can do. It's interesting that all of these examples with something so small can do something so big or so large.
I mean, I think he gives these different examples to really put in like how powerful it is, and he does different examples to relate to different people. So like I understand the bits in the horse's mouth, make them obey us, you guide them and everything, and I understand the rudder and the ship, but I think I haven't really experienced either one of those, but I've seen a fire and I've seen how big it can get. A couple of years ago, like with the Gatlinburg fires, the teenagers started that with a small fire and it destroyed people's homes. It just, destroyed acres and acres and acres of land. And it's just amazing how something can start so small and do a world of destruction.
We're going to talk about some things that are very destructive, that can be destructive in a marriage, that can be destructive as a parent, and that can be destructive as a brother or sister. And the last thing that we read in James 3 is basically dealing with this idea of a double-minded tongue. How we can glorify God, but we can also curse our brother.
I mean, there's plenty of verses that show how your speech is the true heart of what you are. So you can't truly praise God and speak evil out of it, too. That's important to remember.
The first thing that we're going to discuss is controlling your tongue in a marriage. And I think this is something that is a little bit difficult to do on a podcast, especially when you're with your spouse.
Yeah. I'm just trying to hold my tongue.
Generally speaking, in a marriage, what are things that can cause harm by just what we say?
Well, for instance, if we're ever in a disagreement, there's a lot of times that I probably want to give short comments, and that I do, and those ignite a fire, if you will. I mean, not a big fire. It's a well-contained fire, but it does ignite fire.
I think also for some of us, and this is just general, this is not just us specific. Like
Sure.
You are very specific.
Well, I have no other examples to go off of.
People want to feel encouraged. People want to feel wanted. People want to feel like they're meaningful, that they're loved. If they hear the opposite of these things, then it can be very damaging for a marriage.
Yeah, it can be. It can be demeaning towards the other person, not supportive of something going on or something that they have going on.
Short comments.
Yeah, short comments, especially in a little argument.
When I think of short comments, I think of verse 8, specific to a marriage, where it says, "No man can tame the tongue." In some areas of life, it seems easier to tame a tongue, but for whatever reason, when it comes to your spouse, it becomes more difficult at times.
Yeah. I mean, it is hard because you see that person every day. You spend your whole life with them, so you're the most comfortable around that person, and sometimes it's just really hard to not get those last 2 cents in.
It's also one of those things where you need to step back and think, and I'm just talking to everyone that's listening. You married the love of your life, who more than likely is also your best friend. And the times where you get heated, they're probably over something that's silly. And so you need to step back and think about James 3. Or even the song, what we're referencing by when we say, be careful, little mouth, what you say. This is a song that our children sing in Bible class. And this has been brought up before, but there are songs that get sung by our children that we don't listen to. We just think it's great that they're singing about God. Mm-hmm. But there's something so powerful about a lot of the songs, but specific to this one. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of harmful things that can occur, some that are very obvious, some that you know that are happening when you're doing it. Your small fire, creating destruction. But there's also a lot of powerful and encouraging things that can happen from what you say to your spouse. Anything that comes to mind there?
Well, I think if your spouse is going through a hard time at work or just a hard time in general, you need to be there, and you don't always have to speak. You just listen to them speak and just be supportive of whatever they're going through.
Are you referencing my owl nursery rhyme?
Yeah, sure. But I think it's important to just not be negative in your marriage too. I think that has a huge impact on how your marriage can go. Is if you're negative, you may not be necessarily saying anything wrong. It's just if you're negative all the time, that's really going to put a low morale on your marriage.
That's something that if someone is focused on making the best out of a situation, that's just going to rub off on people. And one of the things that you talked about that I've felt personally in our relationship is when I feel important or encouraged, then I typically thrive. And I know that's just from my perspective, but I would say equally as much as that if I give you the same kind of love that you're giving me with encouraging words, that you're probably going to thrive as well.
Yeah. Like words as if like, you look really good. You're looking great. You know.
You're right. That does feel good.
I was actually talking about myself. Oh. Like after I've had a baby 7 months ago, and no mom feels good after they had a baby.
But also for a woman to take time to tell their husband of what they've done for them, or just little things that they're doing, just little things, little compliments go so far for a man's morale.
A woman's too. No,
that's true. So looking at it from a parent's perspective, this is something that, like we said, the reality is this episode is recorded because we have a 3-year-old who tells an elderly woman at a restaurant that her hair looks crazy. So he's very, and I know it's all children, and it's just the stage of life that our son is in, but he's listening to everything and everyone. It's funny a lot of times, but what's scary is when he sees something on television or something that he's seen out in the grocery store or whatever, and then he repeats something that's terrible. Mm-hmm. So thinking about Wyatt, what are ways that we've noticed that we need to be more careful in what we say?
Well, I've definitely noticed tone in his voice. I think that even though that's not necessarily words coming out, just the way you say something, I think can be dangerous too. And so I've really had to step back on how I've disciplined him and just what I say in front of him. And it's not like I use bad language or anything like that. It's just certain things that he repeats. It just does not sound good coming from a 3-year-old. He sounds like he's 16. And we're on that struggle bus right now where we just are trying to control his tongue.
And he's so good-hearted, like he's so loving, but yet he can say something that will just make us blush.
I feel like this is a cry for help. Well, going back to tone, like recently, the past couple of days, he's learned what a stop sign is. And he's learned that you're supposed to, what they look like, what they say, and what you're supposed to do when you see one. So this evening, we have stories and stories galore, like every day. But this evening we were driving and there was a stop sign and he saw it coming up and he said, "Stop, Mom." And he did it in a very hateful tone.
Yeah, it was mean sounding.
Yes. And so we both kind of turned around and got on to him and told him he shouldn't use that. And he mumbled under his breath something like, there's a stop sign right there. And Josh was like, what did he say? And I said, he was saying stop to me as in the stop sign. He wasn't trying to be mean. It was just the tone he used. And that's because probably we had just gotten on to him a little bit ago for something using that same tone.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That I think that's something that we do as adults in a marriage, specifically as parents, and we'll transition to brothers and sisters soon. You may not be saying something hurtful as far as the actual words, but how you use those words can be just as damaging.
Yeah.
So we're very mindful of what we say. And I think that most parents in general, no matter what they believe, try to be careful of what they say around their children because they know their children are like sponges at this point.
By the way, neither one of us have ever said to a woman that her hair is crazy.
Yeah, I don't know where he got that.
You might have said it.
Well, I don't. Yeah. Well, anyways, we're very mindful of what we say in general as parents when our kids are in this stage of life that could cause harm. But I think it's very important for us to shift gears. I know it's hard to stop saying certain things or mumbling when kids are around when they're driving you crazy. But it's very important to think about things that you could say that they'll grab a hold of, and they will in turn encourage people.
When we first moved here, we were meeting new people almost every day. And so we would say, hi, I'm Haley. It's nice to meet you. And so Wyatt picked up on that pretty early, and he would say, hi, I'm Wyatt. Nice to meet you, and shake their hands. And now that we've gotten to know people a little bit more, he doesn't usually see that happen as much. But that just shows something good that your kids can pick up from you too, is how to introduce themselves or how to carry on a conversation with other people.
I think that's important. If you just go to the church building and you just sit down, which we're guilty of a lot.
Yeah.
But if you just do that, your kids are going to see that. And I know this is not really much about what we're talking about as far as your tongue goes, but they want to do what you do. And so if you let your kids do whatever, and because that's what you're doing, they're going to do the same thing. But if you're taking time to try to talk to your brothers and sisters, encourage your brothers and sisters, even though
check on your brothers and sisters.
Then your kids are going to see that too, and they're more likely going to want to mingle.
Yeah.
Although I will say this about, hi, I'm Wyatt, I'm 3 years old. He will also use that as a pickup line.
Oh,
do you remember that?
Yeah, he did use that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, there was 2 girls behind us. They were in college. Wyatt is 3. And after church was over, the services were over, he says, Dad, I need to go talk to those girls. And before I could say no, he was behind the pew behind me. And he pulls out his little hand, like he was going to shake their hand. Hello, my name is Wyatt, and I'm 3 years old. By the way, it worked. So
yeah.
So for some of you may not be married. For others, if you're not married, you're more than likely you don't have any children. But you do have everyday contact with your brothers and sisters. And this is where you feel this more. This is where you notice things more. The same kinds of things that can cause harm and can encourage could be said for your brothers and sisters in your relationships with them. There's probably some things you do that you let go and you think it's okay to do because you don't have that same kind of parent-marriage relationship. Anything you can think of?
Gossiping, or lying, or maybe just kind of something that's not as wholesome as what you would say to another brother or sister necessarily. You may not really think of it as bad, but it still is probably, you wouldn't say it in front of someone you go to church with.
It's interesting. You said this before, that what you say says a lot about you.
Yeah.
Also, what you laugh at says a lot about you.
Yeah.
I'm talking to myself here. There's times where I'm not saying anything dirty. I'm not saying anything that's wrong, but I sure am laughing at it.
Yeah. Well, I think one verse that really sticks out to me, and it's really alarming, is in Matthew 12. It says, Jesus is talking and he says, I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account to the careless words that they speak. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned.
That's powerful.
Yeah. Scary. Especially since James goes over how we cannot tame our tongue. So we all know that there's going to be something that we have to go before God of something that we've said that we should not have.
It's interesting. A lot of things that we think about on how to better ourselves as Christians, we think about ways to serve, which is what a lot of things we've talked about in the podcast.
Yeah.
A lot of the episodes we've recorded so far. But outward things to do, things that we feel like we're doing something active. This is something that's so small, but so big.
Yeah.
Is start with just controlling your tongue. Stop gossiping. When someone is gossiping in front of you about a brother or sister, and even if you're not doing it, stop the brother or sister from doing it.
Yeah.
If someone is saying something that's inappropriate, well, stop the brother or sister from talking about something inappropriate.
Well, as we were studying for this, I ran across someone who did a lesson on taming the tongue and stuff, and it went over gossiping, and they were saying that, they used the example of like, did you hear about Joe? They said it's all about the motive behind what you say to someone. Like you could take one statement, did you hear about Joe? He's really going through a hard time. What can we do for him? Which I think is all great. But if it's not common knowledge and that person hasn't heard about it, it still may not be a good idea. Like maybe just go to that person and say, hey, I heard you're going through this, or what can I do? Or I know you're going through this. What can I do to help you? Instead of going to tell someone else.
If you're not listening to Chris Emerson's podcast, Excel Still More, you need to start. It's pretty powerful stuff. But he mentioned recently, there's a podcast that's entitled What's My Name? And the power of knowing someone's name and how that feels good. I would say that's, if you're trying to think about, okay, I'm very mindful of the things that I say, or I need to start being mindful of the things that I say. I'll try to be stronger and not let someone just keep going in a conversation about someone, like gossiping, like we talked about. But if you want to think about what are things you can do with your tongue that can be powerful, get to know people. Get to know your brothers and sisters. Know their name, right? And then encourage them. Take time to stop what you're doing, and don't just, if you say to someone, hey, how are you doing? And they say, oh, I'm doing okay. Don't just walk away with that.
Mm-hmm. And it really takes effort for someone like me. Like I'm not necessarily the best at keeping conversations going. It really takes a lot of effort and hard work on my part, but it can be done. You just got to step out of your comfort zone and do it.
It's interesting when you think about marriage, you think, well, if my spouse did this for me, I would be so much more encouraged. If I did this as a parent, my kids would thrive. If you take time and say things to your brothers and sisters, it's going to do just as much or more for them.
Yeah, I think so. And then in Proverbs 25:11, it says, a fitly word spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. So it just shows how important that could be to someone, how precious it is, and how much worth it has.
It's obviously important to be careful, little mouth, what you say in marriage and as a parent and as a brother or sister. But more importantly than any of this that we've talked about so far, it's more important to glorify God with our tongue. Yeah,
that's our purpose here on earth, is to glorify God and to give him praise. And in Hebrews 13:15, it says, through him, then let us continually offer up a sacrifice of praise to God, that is, the fruit of the lips that acknowledge his name. So it just shows how important our tongue is. He created it to praise him and not to curse others or him. And we should use it that way. And we all know we're going to slip up with it every now and again. And God says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. It doesn't mean we try to sin, but we know we're going to. I think the same is with the tongue. We don't necessarily try to use our tongue in a bad way, but at some point or another, it's going to happen.
So the things we talked about today are simple. That's not anything new. That's not anything earth-shattering. But the biggest takeaway that I want you to have, that if you're listening, is this. Tomorrow, be mindful of what you say. Tomorrow, encourage someone. Take time to find someone that you know is hurting and encourage them. And if you're married, tell your wife that she looks pretty.
That's right.
If you're a father or a mother, show your children how to love, how to encourage other people. And lastly, no matter what work environment you're in, if you're in the corporate world or not, do not talk about God. Now, a lot of times we're timid to do that, But also, we've also had conversations in this podcast so far that our actions speak louder than our words. So a lot of times, if we're not participating in those kind of conversations, if our coworkers see that we don't say certain things, they may start asking other questions, which in turn, we may be able to glorify God by teaching the good news or sharing the good news with them.
And the opportunity will arise. If you don't engage in certain things, they will notice, and the opportunity will come up for you to talk about God.
Haley, second time, I'm thankful that you spent some time with me and recorded another episode.
Thank you for having me.
For the listeners, in closing, I just want to end with this. Today's the day that you can glorify our Father with what you say.
Thanks for listening to the show. Please review, share,